It's my nerd world. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, and this week on the show we'll talk a little Phantom Menace. We've got anniversaries going on. Not just the Phantom Menace, but you've got, 14 years for Revenge of the Sith. You have 17 years for Attack of the Clones, which I watched this week. And then 20 years for the Phantom Menace. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll also attach to that a brief conversation about the influence of social networking in Star Wars. We've tackled this topic before on the show, but it's incredibly relevant right now with the big news item that we'll dive into before we do listener feedback this week, and that is Benioff and Weiss. I was completely wrong in my predictions, but Benioff and Weiss, according to Bob Iger, will be the individuals responsible for the next Star Wars film, the showrunners for Game of Thrones. And of course, this weekend, Game of Thrones is wrapping up. We've got a lot to get to on the show this week. It is brought to you by My Nerd World, and more specifically, mynerdworld.net. I've done a lot of updates to the website. You can find this show there, and links to all shows if you want to share it with somebody. I've put up a brand new page of concept art for my science fiction space opera series, Embark. You can check out all that amazing work by Tom Edwards there. You can also link from there to get a copy of the book, Embark, and details about its upcoming sequel, Treasure in Darkness. It's all available, again, at mynerdworld.net.
We've passed on all we know. 1,000 generations live in you now. But this is your fight. Be with you. No one's ever really gone.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
No one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
I'm glad you're with the show again this week to hear this uber Star Wars nerd that writes novels for people who love movies because I love Star Wars. Thank you so much for checking out the show this week. I was going to mention this, and maybe I've done this before, so if I have, I apologize. But in the intro, part of that is before the addition to the Rise of Skywalker trailer. A part of that is the teaser trailer from the 2015 The Force Awakens trailer that debuted at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim, of which I had the honor to attend. And we do have a little bit of next year's Celebration news to get to in listener feedback this week. But in that trailer, we got the line, who are you? I'm no one. Do you think it's as simple as that? Like, do you think that it was set, right, the mystery around Rey's parentage, which J.J. Abrams said will, there is more to the story that we will get in The Rise of Skywalker. But if it turns out, which I believe most likely she is, a nobody, relatively speaking, to having any direct bloodline to the Skywalkers or Solos, right? If she is a nobody of somebody else. Okay. How interesting would it be if that particular teaser trailer that debuted in 2015, where Who Are You? I'm No One, was absolutely spot on and actually solved the mystery back then during a teaser? That would make me laugh. Welcome to the show. Again, I am glad you're here. We got a lot to get to on the show today. Normal length of show this week. There's not a ton of news. We'll talk, like I said at the intro, we'll talk a bit about Bob Iger confirming the Game of Thrones guys are helming the next installment of the franchise. I'll read you this article from Deadline. Share with you some of my thoughts now that we have a little bit further information about what to expect. It seems my theories that I laid out last week, I think those are still possible based on the timeline, that they could still sneak in another Star Wars movie within the timeline or change things up. But we'll stick with what we know officially, and I'll try to stick with that with regard to my commentary surrounding that. And then there's a lot to talk about within listener feedback this week as well that we'll get into in the last portion of the show. I did want to take a moment, and I have a piece of audio here for you, and this will be as an introduction into the conversation about Benioff and Weiss, and then further discussion or further conversation and commentary just about the power of social networking. And applying that to the Star Wars universe and people that comment online, on Twitter or on YouTube, and whether or not that's having a larger impact on the decision making at Disney. But let's get into that by starting off a bit with the Phantom Menace. It is a 20-year anniversary. We are in that week where all of the prequel trilogy films debuted at one point or another. Like I mentioned before, 13, 17, and 20 years old, respectively, for 3, 2, and 1 in the prequel trilogy, and a lot of talk around the Phantom Menace as of late. And it really is fascinating to me how the popularity of those films has gone back and forth and changed. And Attack of the Clones now, as I've said many times, seems to be the lowest ranked of all the Star Wars films at the moment. That used to be held by the Phantom Menace, at least in terms of perception. But it seems like that's going right now to Attack of the Clones. And as I've said before, I really do love that movie. And I think that the sequel trilogy has enhanced my viewing pleasure of that film. The biggest complaint that people have, at least of what I've seen, and feel free to comment, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or drop me a comment on YouTube if you have a difference of opinion on this. I'd love to hear it. But the chief complaint that I hear about Attack of the Clones is that love story between Anakin and Padme. And I know how clunky it is and how clunky the dialogue is, and I won't get into, again, the reason why George Lucas directed it that way, be that as it may. Watching the sequel trilogy play out and that relationship between Rey and Kylo, has really enhanced my already positive outlook or spin or opinion of that element of Attack of the Clones. I look past that clunky dialogue and look a little deeper into, Anakin's just an incredibly immature young dude who didn't have a strong father figure growing up and is sort of being raised and weaned on the Jedi, which, when you go to Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi and how the hubris of the Jedi and how they got it wrong, it adds a layer and dimension to that film. It seems like most people are down with the mystery, the noir mystery of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and with the talk of a potential Obi-Wan Kenobi series on the streaming service, which Bob Iger didn't confirm what it would be, but did confirm that there would be another Star Wars live-action show on Disney Plus, apart from The Mandalorian and the Cassian Andor series. It seems like most people really do like the Obi-Wan Kenobi element of Attack of the Clones. Their biggest issue is just the romance part of it. And I love them both. Attack of the Clones for me is one of the largest in terms of scope, next to Revenge of the Sith. But both of those films with scope are really, really big. But getting back to the Phantom Menace, the Phantom Menace has gained a new sort of level of respect in recent years, and the number of people who found Star Wars through the Phantom Menace, that generation is becoming a lot more active in the podcasting world and on social networking. And I think because of that, you're getting a bit of nostalgia from that generation of individuals who saw the Phantom Menace at an age of which this 46-year-old you're listening to saw A New Hope, and it had an impact on them and brought them into the Star Wars universe. I love all these films, and I'm not ashamed to say it, despite flaws. But I really enjoy The Phantom Menace. And I really appreciate what George Lucas was trying to accomplish. And how do you follow that stuff up? Right? I mean, how do you follow up the biggest at the time, movie series in franchise history with the original trilogy? And you've got access to this new technology, and suddenly now you can really expand upon the ideas that you have. And sure, some stuff worked and some stuff didn't, but I go back and I watch The Phantom Menace, and I find it really entertaining. I really enjoy the film. And even pacing-wise, when you compare the pacing of The Phantom Menace to A New Hope, it's paced a lot faster. And as I've said many, many times, I can just go and watch a Star Wars movie and enjoy it the same way that I would enjoy opening up any one of the art of books for any of the films. I love looking at the artwork of what these creative and talented individuals put together with their own ideas, some of which get used and some of which don't get used. Just to watch and look at the galaxy that's laid out on the big screen when you watch these films, that's enough to keep me entertained. But the story in and of itself is good too, and it's interesting. And again, the prequel trilogies are not without their flaws, but I think that time is really doing a service to that prequel trilogy. That's really, really encouraging, especially for this fan of The Last Jedi and how much I absolutely adore that film. I firmly believe that it too will be looked upon with a lot of reverence as well, and a lot of the negativity will sort of fade away as time goes on. So speaking of which, this is what I wanted to share with you in talking about Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. Somebody had tweeted this out, and I went on YouTube and I found it. This is a 2-minute and 30-second news report on the opening night of Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. And what I find so fascinating about this particular news story isn't so much the commentary around it; it's what you would expect, and the comments they get from fans. What's so fascinating about this to me is looking at it in retrospect of the world prior to social networking. And this was really the only gauge that you had as a fan to see what other average fans felt about the film. Sure, you could go to message boards for the hardcore fans. You go to your Force.net's message boards. I don't know if MillenniumFalcon.com was up at that point in time. That was a website that I used to go to a lot. But this is what's really interesting. I mean, apart from the critics and the handful of individuals that may have been doing early blogs online, we weren't really online back in 1999. Not in the way we are now, certainly. I don't even think at that point in time... No, I didn't even have a computer in home. I was working in radio in Tucson, Arizona, in one of my first full-time jobs. And yeah, I didn't even have a computer at home at the time. So this was really the only gauge of the fandom response that you can get. The news story kind of points to this, but what's really interesting to me, and I'll talk a little bit more about it after I play the audio, is how influence does change perspective. And there'll be a short after show to this week's podcast, because I do want to talk a little bit about Game of Thrones, but I don't want to do it during the show, so we'll do another edition of the, My Nerd World of Star Wars podcast of After Show, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But what's interesting is that the number of fans at the time that liked The Phantom Menace, that over time changed their tune. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But first off, here, enjoy this little piece of nostalgia back from 1999 and a news report discussing the opening night of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
In focus tonight.
It really didn't have any personality. It was amazing. It was everything I thought it was going to be and more.
The hype and the craze, but is Star Wars worth the wait? The Phantom Menace reviewed by the fans.
We're in focus tonight is the new Star Wars movie, all it's hyped up to be. Well, critics stepped aside. Real people today are voting at the box office. Let's go to Hal Eisner. He's here right now with a tally, and it's going to make a lot of money.
Well, Alan, Tani, it's finally here. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. For some people, seeing this movie is just short of a religious experience. But did it live up to its billing? In focus tonight, the new Star Wars review from the fans. Every good story has anticipation.
I've been waiting 15 years since Return of the Jedi came out to see the prequel.
There's no way it's going to be a disappointment.
Are there any of you that think this is going to be a lousy movie? No! Finally, after a long wait, the midnight crowd, myself included, packed the AMC 14 theater. The lights dimmed. The projector rolled, and
you refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force.
I like the special effects. I thought Lucas did a really good job.
It was so intense. I mean, my heart was beating. It's still beating now. And I just screamed, literally.
It was amazing. It was everything I thought it was going to be and more.
Anakin, tell him to take off.
I think that little Anakin Skywalker, and everyone's going to say it, stole that movie.
Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I mean, I don't want to bag the movie, but I really didn't think I cared about the characters.
I sense much fear in you.
It had good effects. I'm not too big on the acting, but hey, that's just me.
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
God, I'd put my feet up if I could.
Thumbs way down.
You didn't like it?
No, I think I deserve a public apology from George Lucas.
I was kind of disappointing in the ending, but yeah, I gotta say it was worth the wait.
Overall, our informal survey of 19 people after the midnight show tallies up this way. 10 loved it, 7 liked it or thought it was okay, and 2 are no longer Star Wars fans. But even those who weren't thrilled say they had fun being part of the hype.
My nerd world.
Just an interesting trip down, sort of the nostalgic lane going back to 1999, 20 years ago. I'll never forget my experience going into the theater to see it. And walking out from the movie, it's interesting because I can actually compare it best to the both experiences that I had seeing The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. When I first saw The Force Awakens, I can't even describe the level. I don't think I've ever been so hyped for anything in my life. Not even The Phantom Menace. I was a massive Star Wars fan, don't get me wrong, but I was not entrenched in it like I am now, and like I was in 2015. And the expectation heading into that film, and how much I was looking forward to it, and the week leading up to it, and the day of the screening, and getting in line, because he didn't have reserved seating in Tucson where I went to go see it for the first showing on Thursday, and then getting into the theater 45 minutes early, and that was the longest 45 minutes of my entire lifetime. Now, I knew a lot about that film going into it. I really had spent a lot of time on Reddit, and for those that know, I mean the shooting script, which changed not drastically, but there were some pretty major differences between the shooting script and the shooting script and then what ended up making it on screen. But I remember walking out from seeing that with my son Logan, and just kind of like, oh, like I just ran a marathon. I liked it, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like I was walking out of a normal film where I was like, man, that film was great. That wasn't what it was. It was just kind of like, oh, I did it. And then going back and seeing it again, and I think I saw it 12 times in theaters, and then really just falling in love with the movie. And it was the same thing for The Last Jedi. Walking into The Last Jedi and my level of hype going into that, and walking out after seeing what it was we saw. And this really relates to Game of Thrones that I'll talk about later on. For the record, I really liked what happened on Game of Thrones last week. I liked the fact that it went and did sort of a Rian Johnson move and subverted my expectations. I'm down with that. I really like that. That's challenging, though. And much like with Game of Thrones last weekend, where when that whole thing went down, for those that saw it, I won't get into it now, I'll save it for the after show. It took me kind of overnight for me to digest it and then sort of land on where my head was with it. And that was the way it was for a lot of people seeing The Last Jedi. On a second viewing of The Last Jedi, I just adored the film. I loved it. But walking out, I had that very sort of uneasy feeling of, what did I just see? I really need to digest this. that was the same thing for me with The Phantom Menace. I remember walking through the parking lot with a guy that I was working with in radio at the time and thinking, I really liked it. I can't wait to go and see it again. And granted, there were things about it that were uncomfortable. When I remember the first time seeing it and hearing Jar Jar really do dialogue for a while, it just didn't sit quite well with me. I wished it would have been different. It doesn't bother me anymore, and I appreciate it for what it is, for what they did with Jar Jar. And I don't get into I don't agree with a lot of the criticisms about the stereotypical characters, and we don't need to break that apart. But I get why people have a hard time with the way that George Lucas sort of voiced particular characters and had that relate to the real world. Personally, for me, I don't get offended by that stuff, and I don't think that the people that he was trying to go and provide sort of a stereotype of, which was what it is, I don't think a lot of those people would get offended by it either. I like what George was trying to do. He was creating this other universe and these alien characters, and he was giving to them personality traits and sometimes dialect that makes it a little bit more relatable, and some of those do fit into stereotypes and some of those don't, and I appreciate the fact that George Lucas did that. Being offended is a choice, and I chose not to be offended. Now, if somebody felt like their particular culture was being mocked, they have absolutely a right to be offended. But I liked what George was attempting to do with those characters within this galaxy and this world that he created. The action in it's really good. The ending battle's really good. That lightsaber battle. The only complaint I have over the final lightsaber battle, which I know most people rank as the best one of all the films, I really like the Attack of the Clones one at the end with Anakin, Dooku, and Obi-Wan. There's a couple of moments during that fight with Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan Kenobi where there's just a couple of shots that take me out of it because you can tell how orchestrated it was. Especially, there's one particular shot of Obi-Wan Kenobi before they get to the generators, right as they walk into the generator room on Theed. There's one sort of spin that Obi-Wan Kenobi does that looks really, really orchestrated and choreographed. And actually, I'll mention this about The Last Jedi while we're here. There's a moment in The Last Jedi at the very beginning of the Praetorian fight that drives me nuts, and I wished that Rian Johnson and Ron Bergman would have caught it, but right when that fight kicks off with Ben and Rey and the Praetorian Guards, there's a confrontation center screen of Kylo, Ben, confronting and starting his battle with a handful of those Praetorian Guards. There's one moment where he's got his right arm on the back of the head of one of the Praetorian Guards, and there's a pause. And I almost feel bad for bringing it up, because if you see it, I don't think you can unsee it. There's a pause, and you could tell they had to, that Adam Driver was waiting to make another particular move before he shoved that Praetorian Guard forward. And it's just a split millisecond of a pause, but it's just enough to make it look like, oh, you intentionally paused because the other swing wasn't done. That's super petty. Make no mistake. It does not ruin the film for me whatsoever. It's just one of those things where, if they could go back and just tweak that a skosh, it would be perfect, right? It would just be absolutely perfect. But it's interesting to me to hear the response from the fandom. And that poll that they gave at the end of that news story, to me, is very, very indicative of the world that we live in now, percentage-wise. And that is, when he broke those numbers down of 19 people, whatever it was, 19, and there was like 4 that didn't like it, 2 that said they never watched Star Wars again, but all the other ones loved it, right? That, to me, is very representative of the fandom right now. And I know people will disagree with me, and there's no way to quantify it. I do have an article that we'll get into with Twitter here in just a moment to kind of share with you some data about Twitter that maybe will lend some credibility to what I'm about to say, but the negative part of the fandom that is vocal on Twitter and on YouTube does not represent the majority of the fandom out there. And that news story back from 1999, I think, is very much still representative of the breakdown of percentages of how the fandom feels. The vast majority of it loves Star Wars and everything about it. You've got a smaller group of individuals that are kind of indifferent, right? And then you've got that even smaller group of individuals where they just absolutely hate it and hate what they're doing right now. I just found that to be really, really interesting and valuable and worthy to the discussion that, you know what, we're going to go ahead and have right now.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power.
Snoke is so much fun.
And beyond that, something truly special.
You know, we haven't talked a lot of Snoke on the show. Snoke was so great in The Last Jedi. And I'm totally fine that he got killed. Because the way he's utilized leading up to it, every time Snoke shows up in The Last Jedi, I think it blows away the times that he's in The Force Awakens. The holographic stuff in The Force Awakens pales in comparison, in my opinion, to what we get from Snoke every time he's on screen. Whether it's in the beginning when he throws a Huck, or Hucks to the ground, and we got them tied on the end of a string, or the scenes where he's engaging with Ben Solo and with Rey. He's just fantastic. And that's what makes Kylo Ren taking him out, Ben Solo taking him out, even that much more impactful, just because of how great he is. Like a part of me goes, I'm fine if he didn't kill him and they kept him as the main protagonist going into 9. That would have been great. That being said, that moment where he kills him and that whole scene there is all the better because of his time on screen leading up to that particular moment. All right, so all that being said, last week I pontificated greatly on my ideas of what's going to happen with the future of Star Wars, and at the moment I was completely wrong. So let's get into what we know now. This is the article from Deadline.com that I wanted to share with you. Star Wars film feature. Star Wars film future. Bob Iger confirms Game of Thrones duo helming next installment after franchise hiatus. The next feature outing for the Star Wars franchise will be a new installment directed by Game of Thrones executive producers David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, according to Disney CEO Bob Iger has confirmed. Now, it says in the article directed by, and that to me seems to be some gray area. They're the showrunners, and showrunners for a TV show is drastically different than what they do for movies when it comes to producers, writers, and directors. And so I know the article says the new installment directed by Game of Thrones, but I don't know if that's extrapolation on Deadline's part, or if Benioff and Weiss are going to end up creating sort of the universe and then other directors will come in. Because, see, this leaves the door open when it comes to Rian Johnson. So if Rian Johnson is indeed collaborating with Benioff and Weiss, and Benioff and Weiss are directing the first film, then maybe it's Rian Johnson who's establishing this next trilogy, and instead of helming the first film, Benioff and Weiss will be helming the first film based on a story by Rian Johnson. You follow? Also, if this is just a Deadline and the media extrapolating what their opinion is of what they're going to do, then maybe Benioff and Weiss are going to be the ones that are going to go and sort of craft this new story in whatever timeline is that'll fall into. That'll be determined later on. And then we'll get other directors to come in and direct their vision of what Benioff and Weiss put together. The company boss ended his appearance at an investor conference in New York with updates about the Star Wars universe. The entry by Benioff and Weiss was announced in February 2018, and last week revealed 2022 was the target date for the next installment as part of a larger setting of overall release dates. Iger also said another Star Wars streaming service would hit Disney Plus streaming service. A streaming series would hit the Disney Plus streaming service, joining The Mandalorian and an untitled prequel to Rogue One before the 2022 release of the Benioff and Weiss feature. At the film studio, there are now half a dozen Star Wars films in various stages of development, the CEO said. Despite no lack of creative material, the company determined that taking a break after the upcoming release of the concluding 9th installment would make sense, Iger said. Reflecting on the run since the 2012 acquisition of Lucasfilm, Iger noted that there have now been 5 Star Wars features released by Disney. It's our feeling that we've done a good job with those. Nevertheless, as the company took stock of the franchise, especially with Disney Plus ramping up toward a November launch, the management team felt it would be smart for us to take a bit of a hiatus while we figure out what's next. The conclusion that we reached is that 3 years was the proper amount of time to not only take a breather and reset, but to really gear up for the next film's release. It's a time-tested interval. The first 3 Star Wars movies arrived in theaters in 77, 80, and 83, and the second 2 trilogies also spaced accordingly. As Disney began to put more of a stamp on the franchise over this decade, it introduced the first spin-off films of Solo and Rogue One to increase the frequency of Star Wars-related titles in theaters and keep fans engaged. In 2018, though, Solo proved a rare wake-up call. Creative differences resulted in the firing of its co-directors, and ultimately the film drew mediocre reviews and did not make a profit. Iger preemptively said he would not reveal any additional details behind the new Benioff and Weiss iteration, which extends the story beyond the 9 parts originally conceived by George Lucas. Look, okay, so a couple of things here. I do think that Disney's and Lucasfilm, their best course of action, in my opinion, if it were me, would be to continue the existing timeline of the saga movies in making this next trilogy. If you're gonna wait that long, then let's continue moving forward. Does that mean you call it episode 10? Why not? I think that's the best move on their part, and I would not be surprised if that's where we were going. That Star Wars Episode 10, while the Skywalker story will have concluded with the Rise of Skywalker, this will continue down the timeline of where we're heading, of where we're currently at. To me, that's got the most bang for the buck of the mythology. You have the opportunity to tie it into the characters that we've grown to love over the course of the past few years. That makes the most sense to me. It almost seems as if Disney and Lucasfilm are taking the approach of the spin-off films will now be best served on the Disney Plus streaming platform. So we'll tell the spin-off stories on the streaming platform. And then we will continue with saga stories on the big screen. And to me, me personally, like I mentioned last week, when you look at the age of the fandom and the part of the fandom that wants to see that Knights of the Old Republic, I'm of the opinion that you are better served with the public as a whole, moving forward in the timeline, not going back to a time before the Phantom Menace and reestablishing that. If you're going to do that on the streaming service. I could absolutely be wrong. And perhaps the idea here is that, okay, we're going to make another saga and more than 3 films. We'll do 6. And those 6 films, those 2 trilogies, we're going to go way back. And we will go back and do the Old Republic type stuff, decades prior to the Phantom Menace. I would be okay. Look, I'll be okay with whatever they do. I don't care. I'm just saying that they could do that, and then when they're done with that, jump back in and revisit the current timeline that we're in with 7, 8, and 9. But again, if I were in charge, I would be, no, man, let's keep moving forward. Let's go to 10. If we're going to be waiting this long as fans, then that, to me, is what gets me super excited. It gets me super excited to find out, okay, what happened to my characters and what's going to happen with them next. And a quick thought on the timeline, by the way. So we'll get The Rise of Skywalker this December, okay? And then we'll have, going into 2020, we'll have all the post The Rise of Skywalker commentary. And then that will lead into the Blu-ray release. I'm just talking about, and what I'm laying out here is sort of the calendar of milestones and landmarks for me as a fan and for you as a fan. So you get into 2020, and then you've got the commentary and everything that took place with the Rise of Skywalker, and all the discussion and stuff that we can talk about how that film wrapped up the franchise. I think we're going to be talking about the Rise of Skywalker probably in a different way, but we're going to be talking about the Rise of Skywalker for a long time after the release of that film, along with, in the same way that we've been talking about The Last Jedi. I wonder if Disney knows that. Like, if they know this, obviously they know the story, they know the movie, JJ's written it, he's shot the whole thing, he's editing it right now, but I really do wonder if they know, all right, this has the potential, based off some recent leaks that we've seen, that there was a story that came out, not a huge surprise here, I've talked about this before on the show, this is more of, again, your Target Walmart spoiler stuff. But MakingStarWars.net put out an article that Billy Lord may have served as a stand-in for Princess Leia for a flashback scene that might fundamentally change some things that we thought we knew in the previous 8 films. You see a story like that, and to me, I go, okay, we're going to be talking about the Rise of Skywalker for a long time to come. Okay, so you get into 2020, post Rise of Skywalker commentary discussion, and then you get the Blu-ray, right? You lead up to the physical release of it, eventually the release in the streaming service. Along with the streaming service, we'll have Resistance, we'll have Mandalorian Season 2, we'll have the Cassian Andor series in 2020. Okay, so then we get into, and then no Star Wars movie as of right now in 2020. We will have a Star Wars Celebration, which I've now heard from 2 different sources will be in August. And we'll talk about this again later on in the show. So then you get into 2021. Now, I imagine by mid-2021, we'll have a really good idea of what the 2022 film will be. And by the time you get to 2021, the end of 2021, I imagine that they'll start building up the hype again. And this is a bold prediction way far out, but I imagine that by Thanksgiving or Christmas time 2021, we'll have some sort of sneak peek into what we're going to be getting in December of 2022. And then we're back into the Star Wars universe again, right? And then we're back into the game, and then we're back into the films again. So when you look at it from, like when I used to travel from Tucson to California, that trip went by in a flash because I had markers, right? I had landmarks along the way that told me, well, now that I'm here in Blythe, I know I have X amount of hours left, and now that I'm here at the windmills, I've got so much time left, and it really shortened up that drive. Disney is going to make sure that we've got as many landmarks as possible along the way to satiate the wait, if I use that word correctly, to alleviate the frustration of having to wait for another theatrical release. We'll have plenty of entertainment and content in the Star Wars galaxy to, I think, make sure that we'll be fine and waiting for it. By the time it comes back around, we'll all be absolutely salivating, right? for that next Star Wars film.
This is not going to go the way you think.
When Game of Thrones last week's episode debuted, Twitter had a trending theme. And the trending theme was how you felt about the second to last episode of Game of Thrones will determine how you feel about the next Star Wars movie. And I was just like, oh, come on, give me a break already. We are at a place right now within the fandom. And there's a great piece that I put up on my Facebook page, Jon Justice, you can find it. And I can't remember. Hold on, let me. I can find it here in 2 seconds if I pull up my Facebook page. The article was titled "Fan is a 4-letter word." Here it is. Screen Crush. Fan is becoming a 4-letter word. And the article starts off saying, I was recently talking with somebody and the conversation happened to turn to the topic of professional wrestling. Oh, you're a wrestling fan, the person asked. I paused, not quite knowing what to say. It's not that I was embarrassed to like professional wrestling. I'm not. Okay? I just didn't want to be called a fan of anything. At the moment, I realized that took me by surprise. Basically, my whole life, I defined myself by my various fandom. I subscribed to the theory set forth by John Cusack's character in High Fidelity. What really matters is what you like, not what you are like. But more and more lately, fan feels like a four-letter word, and I don't want to be associated with it. And it's a really interesting piece. I agree with some of the points that are made, and I disagree with a lot of the points that they were made. I proudly go and call myself a fan. I try to care less and less, and I'm of the opinion that we are heading to a place right now where people are beginning to take the narratives that develop on Twitter, less on Facebook, the garbage that is put out on YouTube, and just not take it as seriously as they used to. But case in point, the timing of the announcement of Benioff and Weiss being the first to get their new Star Wars film, it did spark a lot of debate online. And a lot of people, and look at the Reddit threads, were getting all frustrated, saying they're going to ruin Star Wars now, basically the way that they ruined Game of Thrones, and that unless they have good source material, they can't do good writing and all this stuff. And look, everybody is entitled to their opinion. I tend to disagree with that. I think these guys are really talented, and if Disney and Lucasfilm have shown anything, they are not going to sit by and put out a product that isn't quality. All of the movies that they've released, in my opinion, The Phantom Menace, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, Solo, and Rogue One, all hit the mark for me. I find all those films to be highly enjoyable, despite all the controversy surrounding them. Here's just a bit of data to share with you. As you navigate Twitter and the commentary around Twitter, and in the wake of Benioff and Weiss, and what'll certainly come about when we get more details of the Rise of Skywalker. This is taken from an article in the Atlantic, and I use this on the radio show that I host. It's called "Political Leaders Should Stop Caring About Twitter," but this applies to pop culture as well. And I just highlighted a part of this, and I wanted to share it with you. According to just about every study that's ever been conducted on the question of Twitter influence, Twitter is not representative of the majority in the slightest. The Pew Research Center, for example, has found that less than a quarter of Americans log on to Twitter with any regularity. And it's a game of demographics, and this is what I love about the clarity with this, because it really does go to show, especially when you're talking about the anger and fandom, how representative of that is. How representative is that of the fandom as a whole? It really isn't. So only a quarter of Americans log on to Twitter with any regularity. And as the Atlantic's Alexis Madrigal points out, those regular users differ from the wider population. In the United States, Twitter users are statistically younger, wealthier, more politically liberal than the general population. Politics Twitter is a bubble in itself. Among the minority of Americans who regularly use Twitter, a majority never tweet about politics. According to a 2016 study, fewer than 1 in 5 active Twitter users, which is to say about 1 in 20 Americans, report posting about politics some or a lot of the time. So you have a quarter of Americans, and then you have an even smaller portion of individuals who are talking just politics. That applies to pop culture. And then you begin to break down pop culture. What are we talking about? We're talking about movies, TV, music. Okay, now you've broken that even down further. Then you get into just Star Wars specifically. Now you've broken that down even further. According to a recent analysis by the New York Times, left-leaning Twitter users who regularly post about politics are richer, better educated, and less diverse than the Democratic Party as a whole. Again, this is about politics. One study, let me jump forward because this is all political stuff. Let me jump forward to the other relevant things here. One study surveying the evidence for who talks about politics on Twitter found that users participating in political discussion were mostly men living in urban areas with strong ideological preferences. Another study of the researchers of Pennsylvania and the National University in Singapore came to a starker conclusion. Only self-reported extremists appear to devote much of their Twitter activity to politics. Social scientists have known for decades that the most politically active citizens are highly unrepresentative of the population as a whole. And again, I think you can replace politics with pop culture. Okay. On average, citizens are more politically or pop culturally engaged who write letters to their local newspaper or go to PTA meetings, right? For this reason, key social and political institutions are in danger of being captured by their loudest and most resourceful constituents. And this is where I think that it really hits home when it comes to pop culture and the comments that we see. Small but highly ideological factions have repeatedly taken over their political parties. They've also done the same thing to fandoms. Different groups of people, but they've done the same thing to fandoms. Okay? The outsized influence that small, unrepresentative groups now exert via Twitter is of particular concern. Until the advent of social media, decision makers were only confronted with their angriest detractors on specific occasions. So here they talk about town halls and letters and newspapers for which they could mentally brace themselves. I would say that also applies to pop culture, where before you were only confronted by the angry detractors of a particular fandom, whether it's DC, Marvel, Endgame, Star Wars, Star Trek. If you went and seeked it out online, finding somebody's opinion in an article or a blog post not to be seen most often as it is now on Twitter by your anonymous, Twitter warriors, okay? When you're on Twitter, every controversy feels like it's at the same level of importance. People whose perception of reality is shaped by Twitter live in a different world and a different country than those off Twitter. Now, the last point they make in this particular piece says, if elected representatives that treat Twitter as representative of the public opinion, they will fail to be responsive to the actual views of their constituents. Political journalists will obsess over scandals and debates that don't interest most of their readers, and political campaigns may lose eminently winnable elections. Let's rephrase that. Okay? If movie studios treat Twitter as representative of public opinion, they will fail to be responsive to the actual views of moviegoers and movie reviewers. Movie reviewers and pop culture journalists will then obsess over the scandals and debates that don't interest most of their readers, and movie campaigns may lose eminently to attract viewers to the box office. Again, I just wanted to take a moment on the show this week and provide a little bit of perspective while we continue to navigate these waters and you see all this commentary, because that seems to be like the biggest news item this week was first Benioff and Weiss getting the movie, but that was immediately followed by the fact that last Game of Thrones episode was so controversial for so many people. So hopefully that continues to provide a little bit of perspective, kind of off the beaten path of what we're used to doing on the show this week. But hopefully you enjoyed it. All right. Speaking of enjoyment, I enjoy the listener feedback of the show. I think you do too.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, let's run through the commentary this week. We'll start off with Tracy. Listener feedback. I'm sorry. I feel like while Snoke might have bridged their minds, Ben and Rey, in a specific way, the Force Skype, Rey and Ben already had some type of special connection that made that even possible, which started in The Force Awakens. I mean, Kylo feels the light again as soon as he lands on Jakku, and he senses something in the interrogation scene between him and Rey. Thus, they had a connection in TFA. And I think Ryan decided to just have the Force Skype aspect Snoke's doing to piss off Kylo even more. For example, Kylo feels manipulated even more in the throne room as a result. However, it seems like their connection is still there, and I'll be shocked if it doesn't become even stronger in The Rise of Skywalker. Shock Fitness writes this, enjoying the pod, keep it up, thumbs up emoji. Thank you, Shock Fitness. Julianne Lewing writes this, enjoyed the episode and the story about watching Star Wars with your family. It was rad. Sorry, can't help it. I can't help it either. My dad and I have been watching the recent movies together, and we can't wait for The Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, man, obviously I can't either. Stephanie S. writes this, Rad Vader, I like that. Yeah, if you missed the listener feedback portion of last week's show, be sure you go and check that out. I was getting goofy. Let's see. E-Cruise Symphony? Sure. If I butchered your name, I apologize. Hi, John. Great podcast. I only have a simple question, and that's, where's R2-D2 in The Rise of Skywalker? I'm guessing that he's still on Octo. I only see C-3PO, BB-8, and Dio. Yeah, people have really pointed that out. My guess is, this is my guess on R2-D2. My guess is that he just simply hasn't fit into the promotion that we've seen so far of the film. That's my guess of what's going on with R2-D2. Kind of like J.J. Abrams and his forgetting to have Chewie hug Leia at the end of The Force Awakens. But I'm looking at the promotional poster that leaked, and I remember now that R2-D2 wasn't on it. You do see C-3PO, you do see Dio and BB-8, but no R2. And again, I think that's just a byproduct of the marketing that just hasn't shown him yet. I've got no no reason to think otherwise at this point in time until we figure something out. All right, let's go to Josh Wilcox. Writes this: John, where on earth did you get this information about Star Wars Celebration 2020 being in August instead of April? They never do them in August. I'm sorry, I added the inflection there. I have no idea if that's how Josh wrote that. No, I heard on 2 different podcasts now. I heard on the Resistance podcast, Lacey Gillerin, who's worked with the promotion companies that put on those events, and also on the Rebel Force Radio guys who have some pretty deep connections. They've also been told that it'll be in August next year. And I imagine, look, simply the fact that we don't have any details of the date tells me that it most likely is going to be later in the year. I think by August of this year, they'll let us know that it's going to be in August. Just my guess. All right. The Color of Carmel says this. 1, who exactly is Pablo? Does he work for Lucasfilm or some creative agency who's involved with them? Pablo Hidalgo is one of the heads of the story group within Star Wars. He was a massive Star Wars fan for a long time, ended up getting a job at Lucasfilm, and has worked his way up to be one of the lead guys within the story group that helps the content creators craft these tales that they end up putting on the small screen and the big screen. And he's quite active on Twitter as well. 2, if they do a Knights of the Old Republic, it has to be done correctly and at least consistent with the old lore as much as possible. I disagree with that simply because the old lore doesn't really exist anymore apart from Legends. Right? I don't think they'll deviate far from it, but my understanding is when it comes to the Old Republic stuff, that stuff's all Legends now. So it's kind of free open territory with what they want to do with anything pre The Phantom Menace. If I'm wrong, please email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment on YouTube. If the story of the way that things play out prior to The Phantom Menace has been canonized, please, by all means, let me know what has been. 3, I get the feeling I won't be satisfied when Episode 9 is over, simply because I feel the new characters weren't given a chance to shine. They were, in a way, given a backseat to the original trilogy characters with the first movie. They weren't given any growth in the second movie, and now that it's over for them when the third comes out. I want an adventure arc with just Rey and Ben when it's all said and done. Adam Driver made Kylo Ren such a compelling character that I want to see where Ben Solo heads next. And I want his traveling partner to be Rey, simply because even though Rey is a Jedi, she would be a funny man to his straight man. 4 is the new Avatar movies. As for the new Avatar movies, James Cameron needs to hurry because I'm slowly losing my enthusiasm. All right, let me address this one thing. And again, art is subjective. But The Color of Carmel wrote, I get the feeling I won't be satisfied with 9 simply because I feel the new characters really weren't given a chance to shine. They were, in a way, given a backseat to the characters in the first movie, and they weren't given any growth in the second movie. With all due respect, I completely disagree. I think that the original trilogy characters were divvied up with the new characters pretty well. And especially with the comment of growth in the second movie, in my opinion, The Last Jedi, all our main characters went through was growth. Rey had to go through a ton of growth in dealing with Ben and Kylo Ren and learning about the Force with Luke in the time that she had with him and what it was going to take to bring the light side back into prominence over the dark. Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, of course, went through a ton of growth in that film. Took out Snoke, for crying out loud. You look at Finn, through the course of that film, starting off from the end of the Force Awakens, when he wasn't fully committed, by the end of The Last Jedi, he was willing to die for the Resistance at the end of that film, to which Rose tried to teach him a more valuable lesson of saving what they love. And then you look at Poe, his whole arc was growth in that film. From the moves that he made at the beginning of the movie to the change that you see at the Battle on Crate when he realizes that it's not worth all these people dying in the middle of this attack. So, again, just my opinion, but The Color of Carmel, I really do appreciate the comment. Thank you very much. Kyle Bookout writes this: I agree to a degree that Snoke sensed what was happening between them, either taking credit for it or facilitating it in the Force Skyping, We'll see in 9. This isn't the end for what they've built between them. I love that Snoke was a device of the plot leading to a deeper arc for Kylo. For me, The Last Jedi works on a mythological level that goes beyond Star Wars. Time, hopefully, will be kind to it. It's a challenging film that I feel people will come around to. Metaphysically, it kicks ass as well. You can see as a critique of Star Wars itself, expectations and fandom, an intelligent deconstruction. Now, if that's not what you want in your wars, I get that. Especially after the nostalgic The Force Awakens, that's a note-for-note letter to A New Hope. I'm rambling. Another great one, John. Thank you, Kyle. I really appreciate the comments. So, Zeeth rides, if Ben Solo gets redeemed, I'm done with Star Wars. I responded to Zeeth, and I said, only a Sith deals in absolutes. Smiley face emoji. Zeeth then wrote again. Nice! Exclamation point. What I liked about Kylo was that he was trying hard to be like Vader. He never noticed he had passed him. I think it would be cooler if Rey went dark and then had to be redeemed, but Kylo goes even darker. I'm probably exaggerating that I would ever give up on Star Wars. My life is basically Star Wars. I remember when the prequels were coming out and I was having trivia contests and discussions about the movie with my friend in high school. Now I get to watch a bunch of people that were never into Star Wars get mad about Leia floating through space with the Force. These are the people that did not read the books, like The Glove of Vader, where the canon was actually ruined in horrible ways. Anyways, rant complete. I love your podcast. Thanks for doing it. Thank you, Zeeth. I very much appreciate it, and I'm thankful that you took my comment to be tongue-in-cheek as it was. Anna writes this. What if the next trilogy is about the Solos? The twin Reylo babies and their parents of Rey and Ben. That would be awesome. Could be the story for episodes 10, 11, and 12. Yeah, I'm really curious. I think that this change that Disney and Lucasfilm did may have shifted their focus quite a bit as well as far as what they're going to do with the future of the movies, where if they weren't thinking about doing 10, 11, 12, maybe they will be. I still think that's a smart move. All right, I Love Bose writes this. You're right. These are like the days before we knew that Luke's father was Darth Vader, but then we didn't know it. What a gift we have today in knowing. Yeah, man, take advantage of it. Celebrate your fandom. Rupert Natman writes this. The 4chan / making Star Wars leaks makes the Rise of Skywalker sound like Fritz Lang's The Testament of Dr. Mobius. In that film, the titular doctor is controlling his endless empire of crime from beyond the grave by possessing the bodies of his fanatical disciples. Mobius's ghostly apparition even looks a bit like the original Emperor from The Empire Strikes Back. Rupert, I was not familiar with any of that. I'm going to go and check it out now just because you made mention of it, because I'm very curious. Thank you so much for the comment. And lastly, Anthea Gaia writes this. I believe that Kylo and Rey were first connected by the Force in The Force Awakens during the interrogation scene, but you could argue it was before that because Rey had a vision of Kylo in Maz's castle. It's clear to me that the Force is connecting them for some reason, and I believe that we'll get the answer in Episode 9. I truly believe that Snoke may have thought he connected them, but I don't think he was the one that initiated it. I think it was the Force itself because the two of them together are meant to bring balance. Thank you so much for that, as always, Amy. I really do appreciate it. And look, that wraps up the show this week. I got it in under an hour. All right. Drop your comments to talkshownerd@gmail.com and on YouTube as well. And as I mentioned earlier, go to mynerdworld.net. You can get information about the podcast there. Past episodes are available there. There's a brand new post up of all the amazing concept art and artwork that Tom Edwards, TomEdwardsDesign.com, has done for my Embark series. You can also pick up Embark there at the website as well. And again, quick promotion for the book. I've been kicking around the idea. There actually is a Patreon for My Nerd World, but I haven't done anything with it. And I decided I'm not going to. I appreciate the fact that you download the show, and I hope that you'll share it with friends. And when I don't have regular advertisers on the show, as I mention every single week, one way that you can go and support the show is by simply going to Amazon.com, and if you haven't done it already, pick up a copy of my science fiction novel, Embark. In the future, car culture is replaced by air and space flight, Earth is at risk, and mechanic Taft Guardia fights with his friends to save humanity and the girl that he loves. That book is responsible for the series that I'm writing. Treasure in Darkness, the second book is finished, currently being edited, and I've already begun work on the final installment of this particular trilogy. So, as always, if you want to support the podcast and you haven't done so already, it would really mean a lot to me if you would go to Amazon.com, search for Embark, EMBARK, and Jon, Jon Justice, and pick up a copy of the ebook for You Are a Friend for $2.99. The audiobook is $11.99. You can get the ebook for free. The paperback is $11.99, and you can get the ebook for free. Or you can pick up the audiobook for a handful of different price options, narrated and produced by me. It's 11 and a half hours of science fiction, adventure, space opera goodness. So support my nerd world and go pick up a copy of Embark by Jon Justice. In the meantime, time to say goodbye. We'll hear from Obi-Wan Kenobi here in just a moment. And then just a real quick after show. I want to talk a little bit about Game of Thrones for those that are into it and share my thoughts heading into the finale this evening. Thank you so much, as always, for downloading the show and spending some time with me as I ramble on about Star Wars, and I'll be back again next week.
The Force will be with you. Always.
My nerd world.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Hey, welcome to the My Nerd World, the Star Wars podcast after show. I was so excited about the end of that last Game of Thrones episode and what happened with Daenerys that I went and watched Solo just so I can get a little bit more of my Emilia Clarke fix. I really wasn't hyped about the first few episodes, and even the battle at Winterfell, I thought was too dark and fell flat. I couldn't track it when I watched it, and was, I don't want to say disappointed in Arya's taking down of the Night King. I thought that move was very much the same move that Rey did, and Rey did it better. But I will say that last week's episode I really, really enjoyed, and my favorite moment now in all of Game of Thrones is the moment when Daenerys snapped and decided to burn down King's Landing. And it took me a while for that to resonate, but man, that was just an incredible piece of acting. Really, really loved that. And I like my expectations being subverted. I like watching a scene going, are they going to go there? Are they going to go there? Oh my gosh, they went there. I have no idea how they're going to wrap up the series tonight. I'm recording this on Sunday. I'm going to have to wait till Monday until I have a chance to watch it. But of course, the internet erupted, and that was one of the reasons why, with controversy and divisive thoughts, and who knows what percentage liked it and what percentage different. But there was even a petition started to get Benioff and Weiss or somebody else to rewrite the final season of Game of Thrones because they were so frustrated by it. I just cannot relate. It's just not me. If that's you, that's cool, man. You do your fandom the way you want to do it, but I cannot relate to that. But that's really what brought about me wanting to talk about the fandom and Twitter on the show this week, was because of the response to Game of Thrones, which I thought was fantastic. Emilia Clarke is an incredible actress, and that moment on Drogon when you watch her snap is, again, it was one of the most exciting pieces of scenes that I'd seen acting, and certainly my favorite scene from all of Game of Thrones from the beginning until now. It's just, everybody has the opinion to go and or has the ability to share their opinion on Twitter now, and I think that oftentimes has the ability to influence a lot of people's opinions, where if they were kind of on the fence about something, they may go one way or the other based off what they see online. I do see a lot of people that are burning out on Twitter and Facebook, and I think beginning to realize that just because a lot of people have the ability to share their opinion doesn't mean that it needs to have or should have an opinion on how you feel or how the majority feels. So that's all I wanted to say for the after show this week. Just wanted to talk Game of Thrones for a minute. Really looking forward to seeing how this season plays out. And shows like Game of Thrones, they're a rarity, kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Star Wars. You just don't, you do get them. But when you begin to sort of look at the IPs that have really done well and the franchise that have done well, there's not a ton. And Game of Thrones tapped into the culture in a way that, when you look at combined all the different series that are out there, did it in a way that most series haven't. And, that certainly is in the same sort of ballpark as what Star Wars has been able to do all these decades. Harry Potter, to a certain extent, did that as well. So thanks so much for, again, checking out the show. I really do appreciate it. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. And we'll be back next week. Go to Amazon.com and pick up a copy of my science fiction opera, Embark, for you or a friend. I would really, really appreciate it. My heart and soul and my pop culture fandom poured into that book, and a lot of people really have latched onto it, which makes me really proud and real happy, and I can't wait to get the second book out. So get caught up with the first one if you haven't got it already. All right, talk to you next week. Bye.
My Nerd World.